Writers over at the New York Times decided to take what I would argue is not a great component of Joe Biden's leadership and turn it into a positive, essentially providing cover for one of his flaws. And they did so by comparing him to Sunak over in the UK, Rishi Sunak, of course, who's the current prime minister of the UK, to make this point. So what do they have to say about it? Well, for years, Boris Johnson and Donald Trump were viewed as populist twins, flamboyant, scandal-scarred, norm-busting figures, acting in a transatlantic political drama, with both out of office, at least for now. A more timely and intriguing comparison is between Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and President Biden. Is it though? Is it? Okay.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say, I'm gonna get into it in a second. But they should study this in journalism schools for the most brilliant case of propaganda.
Yeah.
Because they don't actually tell a single lie, but they frame it in such a way that you get the exact opposite of what's happening as an impression. So let's do it.
Now, the headline of this piece in the New York Times literally reads, "For Sunak, like Biden, dullness could be a secret weapon."
Oh yeah, wow.
Being a dull leader is a good thing, actually.
Of course,
okay.
Of course.
So before I continue with more excerpts from this piece, I just want to note, look, oftentimes you'll hear the right wing refer to publications like the New York Times as left wing or liberal. And for anyone who considers themselves left wing or leftist, you hear comments like that, you read comments like that, you can't help but roll your eyes. Your eyes are like stuck in the back of your head because of how insane that is. But it's important to draw a distinction here because I think there's a miscommunication happening. When it comes to policy, when it comes to economic policy in particular, make no mistake, the New York Times and other legacy media outlets are in no way left wing. They go along with the establishment pro-corporate narrative on those policies. But when it comes to providing cover for the flaws of the Democratic Party, they certainly do provide that, and I think that's part of the reason why the right wing thinks the New York Times is left wing.
Yeah, that's 100% right. I'll add one more wrinkle to it though, and this story again is a perfect example of it, because here they take a leader that appears to be on the left wing and a leader that appears to be on the right wing, Sunak in Britain and Biden in America. But in reality, they're not in any of those wings. They're in the corporate wing. They actually agree on almost all policies. And the New York Times loves the corporate wing of politics. So they're here giving compliments to both a right winger and a theoretical left winger.
Yes.
And they appear to be objective, but in reality, the whole thing's a trick. They're not at all objective. They're actually taking the perspective of the status quo is great, corporate rule is great, and Sunak and Biden both love corporate rule and the status quo, and the New York Times is pushing that forward while pretending to be unbiased.
1000%.
If you don't know the tricks, it actually is quite brilliant.
So let's get into the excerpts here. Though they differ by obvious metrics, young versus old, conservative versus liberal, Mr. Sunak and Biden are using strikingly similar methods to govern in the wake of their larger than life predecessors. Both have tried to let the steam out of their country's hothouse politics by making a virtue of being, well, a little boring. Really, is that what we're feeling right now? As we have anti-Semites running around, mouthing off and saying all these terrible things. I mean, where's the steam being let out? I would argue that if you're really interested in letting out the steam and uniting the country, you improve the material conditions for folks in the country, which the Biden administration, by the way, recently did the exact opposite of by pressuring Congress to intervene in a potential rail workers strike and prevent them from doing so.
Yeah, so if you really wanted to let out the steam, you would do what 2/3 of the country wants, which is $15 minimum wage. So when you ask Republican voters, they're generally in favor. Democratic voters are very much in favor of it. It goes to the economic point that Anna's making, but most importantly, it's actually bipartisan. You don't have to trust me, you can look at the polling on it, right? But that's not what the New York Times is referring to. That they view that as populist progressive. And what they're saying is, good, Biden's taking the steam out of that. We wouldn't want to go and do something that the American people actually want. So take that steam out, get back towards corporate rule. And by the way, the genius of this is that even the writers don't know that they're actually doing marketing for corporate rule. They think they're doing news. It's because of the groupthink in DC where they all believe this nonsense. Look at them turning their reality on its head so casually. Boring means you're unpopular. And they take that and go, no, it actually means you're popular.
Get a load of this. And by the way, we were all concerned that the Democratic Party and the establishment overall, the media, they were gonna learn all the wrong lessons from what transpired during the midterm elections, the outcome of the midterm elections, and we were right. So here's a good example of that. 2 years into his term, Biden has confounded the skeptics, with the Democratic Party performing unexpectedly well in the midterm elections in defiance of historical trends that typically punish the party in power. Okay, but you're discounting, the writers here are discounting that one of the reasons why the Democrats did so well, they did lose the House, they still did, let's keep that in mind, but they still did way better than expected. The reason why is because Trump chose the Republican candidates who were lunatics and had nothing to offer. Democrats did relatively well because Republican candidates were that bad.
Yeah, two things about that. One, we've all accepted that the Democrats did well to, like, the framing of this is nearly great in the midterm elections. They lost the House. That's not great, okay? And it looks like maybe tonight they might pick up one seat in the Senate if they're lucky. So, but the bar is so low for Democratic leadership. If they just show up, the corporate press is like, oh, stunning victory. Joe Biden shows up for work today. Amazing, right? So that's point one. Point two is, Anna's absolutely right, because you, and it's the fact that Trump's candidates did so poorly, and we documented it during election night and throughout, it cost about 8.5 points to Republicans that were running. But if you take away that disadvantage for the Republicans, Abbott, DeSantis, Kemp, establishment Republicans crushed Democrats. So if they run one of those guys against Biden, as the corporate press is fluffing up of Biden and how boring and wonderful he is, and how being unpopular is actually just the greatest thing you could do in politics, he's gonna get annihilated by a non-Trump Republican. So you can see it in the numbers.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, look, what are the voters saying? How do they feel about the job Biden is doing? Let's go to graphic 6 here. 55% of Americans disapprove of the president.
But if you read this article, you would never have that sense. You would get the sense that, I mean, because they've said it like at least half a dozen times in the article. And in the end, they call being boring, quote, political gold.
Be boring, everybody.
But it makes it look like he has 55%.
Real trait of a leader.
It makes it look like he has 55% popular rate, a favorable rating instead of 55% unfavorable rating. You see how they didn't actually lie on any given fact, but the framing is the lie.
No, exactly, 100%. Okay, so here's another telling excerpt from the piece, telling in regard to who the writers see as the problem in the political landscape and how Biden did such a great job defeating them. After passing his COVID relief bill, Biden managed to push through ambitious legislation to combat climate change.
Ambitious.
Okay.
Watered down crap. Like, it's like, I'm not saying it's useless, but it was about, at most, and I give him credit that when it passed, for about 15% of his agenda. But for the New York Times, 15% change is just overwhelming. That this, like, takes you tiny bit outside the status quo.
Yeah.
So for them, that is historic change.
I haven't even gotten to the worst part of this excerpt where they write, with narrow majorities in the House and especially in the Senate, he, meaning Biden, had to fend off progressives in his party and win over centrists like Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who held up that bill until he negotiated compromises with the Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer of New York.
Look at how misleading that is.
It's amazing.
If you only read that article, you would never know, as you all know, that Joe Manchin actually killed 85% of Joe Biden's agenda.
Because of his personal profits tied to the fossil fuel industry.
And all the contributions, the campaign contributions he gets from fossil fuel. So guys, they took a guy who killed a great majority of Biden's agenda and made it look like he worked with Biden to get it done. And those rascally progressives were the ones that were trying to block it, when in fact the progressives were in favor of 100% of his agenda.
They must be fended off, Cenk.
They must be fended off.
Yeah.
And look, I don't think that these writers understand politics at all. And they can cry about it. But if they did, that's worse, that's a bigger indictment. Because that means, my God, you didn't understand what happened in American politics at all. I mean, it's a fact that the progressives were 100% in favor of Build Back Better. It's a fact that Joe Manchin killed Build Back Better and watered it down to the Inflation Reduction Act. When you make it appear that progressives were against Biden and Joe Manchin was in favor of him, well, that's the part of what I would consider actually the biggest lie. Which is corporate rule telling you that the status quo is great and conservatives are always awesome, conservatives economically, and progressives are always the bad guys. Not backed up by any facts.
And it's just not representative of what the American people want. So I leave you with two more pieces of information here, okay? One is an excerpt and then one is a graph to counter the misinformation in the excerpt. The similarities between Sunak and Biden are more than stylistic. Both lead parties that are divided between centrist and more extreme forces, whether to the right for Sunak or the left for the American president. However, if you look at the polling for what Biden initially proposed and pretended to want to accomplish under his leadership, the key provisions of the Build Back Better Act were highly popular. Okay, so this is a January 11th, 2022 Data for Progress poll, and it shows that when it comes to the $150 billion in long-term care that Biden wanted to invest through the Build Back Better plan, 76% of voters supported it. These are likely voters, by the way. When it came to expanding Medicaid to include hearing, 73% of likely voters were in favor of that. I mean, the list goes on and on. $555 billion for clean energy. You have 64% of likely voters supporting that. Paid leave, you have 62% of voters supporting that. $40 billion toward Pell Grants and workforce development, 61% of likely voters supported that. The majority of voters, and when you have numbers like 76%, clearly there are Republican voters involved as well. They wanted these provisions in the Build Back Better agenda. But according to these New York Times writers, no, Biden is a hero for essentially conceding to the pro-corporate wing of his party and the pro-corporate, pro-corporate forces in general, in defeating provisions, again, that would materially improve the lives of Americans, but might, I mean, in a very minuscule way, hurt the bottom line of these corporations.
So guys, here's another way that you could read mainstream media and decipher it. Whenever they call the left wing extreme forces as they did there, they never cite a poll, almost never cite a poll. Sometimes they will, and we're honest about it, unlike mainstream media. So sometimes they might cite like defund the police, which actually is unpopular. But the overwhelming majority of progressive issues and almost all of our economic issues are enormously popular. And I just read it to you, you saw it with your own eyes. How could 76% of the country be, according to the New York Times, more extreme forces? 3/4 of the country is extremists, but to the corporate wing of media, which is 99% of media in America, that's extreme. Helping American people is extreme, right? Helping corporations is normal and good and boring and wonderful. So I'm gonna leave you with two quotes. Right after the one that Anna read you, New York Times continued, both are dogged by poor poll numbers, in part because of economic ills, but also because their pragmatic, undramatic style can seem ill-suited to the polarized politics of post-exit Britain, post-Trump America. So they take the fact that they're unpopular, they share that with you, right? But then they surround it with, that's because they're so wonderfully pragmatic and undramatic. And so it's them going, you know what? I don't want to be popular because I think being pragmatic is more important because I care about this country. It takes what's negative for them and magically turns it into a positive because they're not doing news, they're doing propaganda. And the last trick I really want you guys to know about is the quotes that you see in articles. Because a lot of times the reporters put what they want to write in the form of a quote from someone else. Remember, there's 330 million people in America. They can go get quotes from anyone to say anything about Biden. They can get quotes from us to tell you how little that he passed, right? No, they go to friendly people who love the establishment. So one guy said, one person, Kim DeRoche, former British ambassador to the US said, quote, Biden, by contrast, is quite resolute about his moderate centrist principles. The writers go get that quote, put it in. They say, I didn't say he was wonderful and resolute and centrist and all the great things in the world. My source said it, golly gee, right? And last one, same idea. Mark Harper, the transport secretary in the UK, said what he's about, referring to Sunak, what he's about is a government that's grown up, that grips the issues that people are concerned about and gets on with governing. Sounds so positive. Funny how they didn't have any negative quotes about Biden or Sunak. All they found was government officials that love the status quo and the establishment who told you how wonderful these guys are. They mentioned once that they're unpopular. And the rest of it was covered up with propaganda to make it seem like they're both principled and actually doing the wonderful right thing. And in the long run, political gold. Being unpopular is actually political gold.
Political gold.
Absurd. And there you guys go. That's mainstream media propaganda 101.